let's start it off. So this is the React Native's YouTube channel. What I post there is the talks from Munich. For those that don't live in Munich, maybe an interesting move. So we had talks about Redux Saga, Storybook, Pepperoni, Redux, and so on. So you can have a look there if that interests you, because of course we can't do all the talks here because most of the speakers are local in Munich. And yeah, I also post other videos that I find online from, for example, React Amsterdam or React Europe or something like this. Also, there's WebAssembly for those that are interested in this kind of direction, just as a note. So for those that are still beginners, I would recommend to do an online course. For example, Egghead.io has good courses. They're not free. There's some free courses there, but not all of them. I think React Native is not free. And there's a free React course from reacttraining.com where you can learn the basics of React for the web, which is quite similar to React Native. They also have courses for React Native, but they're quite expensive. Then if you have problems installing, like Android Studio, Xcode, anything like that, most of you will have heard of Expo. So there's this command line tool like for the React web version, create React Native app. You run this. You don't need Android Studio. You don't need Xcode. You just download the Expo app from the App Store, scan in a QR code, and then you're back good to develop on the JavaScript side without having the native tools installed and all the problems that you may stumble over in the beginning. Later on, of course, you might want to have these or not, but in the beginning, it's maybe good to get started. So there's an even easier version. This is also from Expo. It's called Snack, where you can just inside this web page on the right side, you see a simulator. You can also, over a QR code, connect it to your phone. So essentially, you can, if you just want to play around with React Native, on the left side, you change the code. It's for example, we can write something here like hello Cologne, and then it immediately gets updated. So if you just want to see what React Native is, play around with it for a bit without any hassle of installing, this is maybe a good choice. All right, so for the more advanced people, what I've shown last time is essentially there's also a project called React Native Web. So instead of just iOS and Android, you could, with React Native, also program for the web. While I've been talking about this for a couple of months now, there's something interesting in this direction. So Microsoft announced Skype based on React Native, if you haven't heard this. So they developed a library called React XP that doesn't only target iOS and Android, but it also targets the web and Windows. Windows is currently experimental, still takes a few months probably until it works perfectly, but they will ship their mobile Skype and desktop app rewritten in React Native, which is, I think, quite some big news and quite a big bet on React Native that Microsoft is daring to, because they bought Skype for, I think, $7 or $8 billion, and experimenting with this size of a project should give React Native at least a boost. All right, then there's something more. If you know this guy here, this is Leland Richardson from Airbnb. So Airbnb, the Airbnb app is a hybrid app. So this is a native iOS and Android app, but they are also using React Native inside the app, and they created this native navigation library where you can mix native and React Native code and use the native navigation controls pretty seamless. And what he's talking in this talk, which is quite recent, is essentially he has created a library called React Primitives, which takes the primitives from React Native, and he's promoting them to be some kind of lowest denominator between different platforms, and just factoring them out of React Native, saying this is maybe something we should start building UIs on, and as a new form of primitive, one level above HTML or native code. So this is all in the direction that maybe React Native isn't just for mobile. I find this very interesting, and I hope this will flourish. And also in React Native, we all had this problem for months that there's no good navigation solution. We had navigation experimental, which was experimental always, and now it's already deprecated again. And they've settled for a library that's called React Navigation, which is quite simple to use. So if you weren't following React Native news for the last month or since the last meetup, this is basically the solution I would suggest using today. There are different solutions. This is rendering in JavaScript, but they also writing a wrapper around, for example, the Airbnb native navigation library that uses the same API. So you can build your app on React Navigation. So if you want to see how this looks like, you can just have a look here. So this is basically an app that I've bootstrapped with create React Native app. And let me just fast forward a bit. So let's. And the internet connection is. So essentially, you just import the stack navigator, which is basically this thing that this stack of cards where you have a back button. And then this is as simple as, let me just go to a. So what you do if you want to, for example, on a button, trigger a navigation action to a different screen, you use props.navigation.navigate, and then you put the route name of the screen you want to go to. And it's really just a few lines. I will show you later the diff between the old and the new version. Here, on top of the screen, you see here you have to add the static navigation options. There you can put the title of the screen that's being put on the navigation bar. And essentially, then you write the stack navigator here. So you're just saying stack navigator and the screen names you want to have. And here you put the component names that should be displayed when you visit that screen. And that's almost the whole code you have to write. It can't be any easier than that. And this is all what we've been hoping for, I think.
Can you just, in the classical React world, you have React Router.
Yeah.
But that is replacing React Router.
This thing? React Router is just for the web.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this I haven't talked about. So React Navigation is for mobile, but it also will target the web. So they will kind of replace React Router, even for the web. And then with this navigation library, you could also write your web application with the same navigation code.
When you're saying they're targeting this or they're going to replace this, are these the same people, or is it that the community is more moving towards React Navigation?
So I think it's an open battle. Everyone can win. But this is a joint effort. React Navigation is a joint effort from the guy that has done Navigation Experimental from and some other, I think, 2 other navigation libraries.
Silvertours is also developed on it.
Yeah, that's new to me because they also have a native navigation library, Wix. All right, so I think this is the React Navigation library. I would suggest if you don't have any specific needs to use a different library, I would just try out this one. And here's the diff. For example, in the React Natives app, we have used the React Native router Flux as a placeholder for something better to come. If you change it, you just need to import the stack navigator. And as you've seen here, this essentially is just screen names, and I've put here some code to style the navigation bar in blue and white. I've just deleted all this router code here that's no longer needed. And as you've seen, here's the title for the navigation bar. And instead of actions map, which we have previously used, you just use navigation.navigate. And there that's almost all we have to change. The rest is just minor changes. What's more is quite interesting is maybe from this guy. He has a lot of experience with React Native. He's written this library, boilerplate library called Pepperoni. I don't know if anyone have heard of it. He worked at Futurize formerly. And essentially he, in this blog post, says, well, I no longer use my own library because so much has changed. I don't want to use a boilerplate with technologies that are already outdated. So he gives a couple of recommendations what to use. Of course, React Native and Redux, but there's also Redux Observable, which he thinks is currently quite interesting candidate. Redux Persist, I think you probably know. React Navigation, we just talked about. Styled components. Styling is still an issue in React Native that's not so elegantly solved. Yarn, if you haven't heard of it, it's an NPM replacement that is a bit faster and caches your code locally. And then Flow, you probably already know, like TypeScript, adds some type safety to your code. Just an enzyme for testing. Prettier is quite interesting. So if you have in your company battles between people that say, I want to have this indented by 2 spaces, I want to have a semicolon and all of this crap, so to say. And there are even situations where then you have to ship something. Somebody has configured ESLint to not accept your code anymore because you misplaced some white space. And this is a good solution for this. Prettier just auto-formats your code. You can write it the way you want, and it just formats it in a standard way. I've, for example, personally put it on saving. So whenever I save my file, it gets formatted, and I don't have to do all of this crap manually, and I don't have to discuss with my neighbor if we should use double quotes or single quotes anymore.
But can you configure the formats, or is
you can configure it, but I just use the defaults for my projects. Pretty good defaults, I think. How much you can configure it if every variant is covered, I don't know. It has some nice things like it knows how long your line is and things like that, and it formats it differently according to the situation, and it's quite nice. You can just try it out, npm install Prettier, run it over your code. In, for example, Visual Studio Code, you can just do it on autosave, and then, yeah, you can just watch your code being formatted.
Could you just add some more information to style components? I'm currently using style components in my app.
Yeah.
But you made a comment towards React Native that it doesn't work that well, or it's a problem, or how do you style components then in React Native?
So for the others, so styled components, this is how it would look like. For example, if you want to style a button, this is web code, of course. You just put the CSS here, because CSS, as I think, is and has always been a problem. So this is a nice way to create a class without having globals. So you put the CSS inside JavaScript instead of a CSS file. This is the idea. I haven't used styled components personally in my React Native projects. I just forward the recommendations that he has done. And personally, I'm just using the plain style sheet dot create and so on. But I think from the impression that I got, the recommendations he gave, this is something I want to look into more deeply. Just yesterday, I saw a talk about a guy that has spent, let's say, most of his life with CSS, and he actually says he presents all of these different solutions, and he says, well, I'm currently not using a CSS in JavaScript, but even being an old school CSS guy, he suggests you should write CSS in JavaScript in the future. So which library will bubble up, I don't know, but this is a good candidate. So what's and so what's more is what this React Native primitives or React primitives library brought us is React Sketch app. So that means if you've written a React Native app, you can now import your styles into Sketch automatically. So this is from Airbnb. If you haven't seen it yet, this is quite interesting. That it's the first purpose where you really see why you should have this kind of abstraction on top of it, because you can simply then hand over to your designer the real styles. He doesn't have to replicate anything, it just gets passed over. So what's more, another weak point of React Native has been the list view, which was very slow if you had a lot of elements, because it didn't recycle the views. So if you had a list like 10,000 elements, they would all be in memory. And what they've done now in the past weeks is they created this new flat list component, which actually recycles the rows. So once they scroll out of the window, they get recycled and used on the bottom, so to say, again, like they do in iOS natively. And that's the same solution here, and I think that's a good step forward. This is not a React Native topic, but Next.js I want to highlight. Essentially, this makes server-side rendering for React apps trivial, really trivial. You have a pages folder, and inside there you put a file, and this is the route name, and you put your React code there, and the rest is taken care of by Next.js. So that means React can be rendered server-side, you don't even notice really. And the other option is you can also, normally if you have the single page applications, they are big application, you see a loading spinner until your application loads. In this way, you can split your code quite easily. You can also do this manually. Some of you probably know, but with this, you can just say, this is one file, one route, and all of this code can be loaded, and I don't have to load the rest of the app. You can also prefetch routes. That means if you know this user will likely click on this and that link, you can already load them in the background, but you don't need to wait for this background loading to be finished to show your first page. So last but not least, so if these topics interest you, I post most of what I can on this React Natives YouTube channel from the talks that we had in Munich. And also we have the Slack channel where I post a lot of links, or on Twitter. Maybe we'll build a website, a community website, where we can share news like this more easily or more fine-grained to your interests. But this is from my side. And now welcome to the speaker. Where is he hiding? And yeah, greetings from Munich.